Photos hold a lot of memories, and some you want to keep in the past. But here are some scary pictures that have stories that will freak you out, like the human dolls of Anatoly Mosk. This already looks like a creepy pasta type of picture, and its backstory is even worse. With a plaster-like face and intentionally painted eyes and Dior tint-like lip paint, it looks like something out of Uncanny Valley. Wrapped in a 101 Dalmatian hoodie and a 123 hat, maybe at first glance it was a failed school project, when in fact it might be, at one point, a real human person. Anatoly Mosk was a former Russian journalist, college professor, and a self-dubbed necropolist, someone who was an expert in cemeteries. And for some reason, Anatoly felt that he was an expert considering that he had a bad habit of digging up graves and collecting the bodies and making them into dolls. Yes, this photo is one of many of the dolls he had created, or well, people he stole. This one was an 11-year-old. And police finally caught Moscovin in 2011 after years of increasing suspicion at the growing numbers of desecrated graves in his home city. And when they arrived at his house, 26 life-size dolls were discovered, or while 26 mummified human corpses were just propped up in his home. Literally, it gets you under your skin. As another thing that would also get under your skin is this photo of Blanche Monnier. Unfortunately, under unfortunate circumstances in 1901, the police was notified with an anonymous tip that a woman was being held captive and held prisoner at the aristocrat's house, or one of the aristocrats' house. Then they dispatched several officers to scope out the location, and when they discovered a locked door of an attic, they were shocked to find a skeletal middle-aged woman laying on a straw mattress soaked in her own excrements and endless bugs crawling all around her. Her name was Blanche Monnier, and she was being held captive by her own mother. The room had smelled so bad that the officers couldn't fully complete their investigation, but they were able to not only capture this image of Blanche, but they were able to help the 55-pound woman who was still fighting for her life after being trapped for 25 years in this absolutely insanity. And what else is insane is this photo of Anneliese Michel. A 16-year-old resident of her home in Germany one day woke up feeling ill. A typical normal, outgoing, and healthy girl suddenly started developing seizures and was diagnosed with psychosis by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly after, she developed a depression where she was treated in a psychiatric facility, and by the time she was 20 years old, she started becoming intolerant of various religious symbols and objects and began hearing voices. Despite taking her medication and trying to be treated for her psychosis, her family fully believed that she was possessed by a demon. Because of her behavior, they appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, and as a result, over 67 exorcisms were conducted on Anneliese. And instead of involving medical professions, the family only relied on these Catholic priests. She stopped eating, and eventually Anneliese passed away due to malnutrition at the age of 20. Still, this very particular photo of her still haunts so many. As you can tell, she definitely needed medical help, but to others who can't see past the bruising on her eyes and alarming weight loss, that she might actually was possessed. As well as when it comes to visiting countries and meeting different peoples of all walks of life is a nice gesture, but maybe it's better to just leave people alone and mind your business, otherwise you might end up like Michael Rockefeller, who also was known as the son of the New York governor and to-be US Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, and also family to the Rockefeller family, and was part of the Rockefeller family. This photo doesn't seem terrifying until you realize the context, and also for editors, you might want to censor a few things in this photo for nudity, as this is a tribe of indigenous people in Papua New Guinea in the late 1960s. Apparently, noted as Michael's last trip in the Pacific region, his smile leaves an alarming end when it was speculated he was killed and eaten by the very people dancing and circulating around him. This tribe, also known as the Asmatpul, are locally known as a group of cannibals that behead their enemies and consume their flesh. I don't know if Michael was their enemy, but maybe they didn't like him that much. So yes, Michael, you did want to meet new people, but too bad no one was able to fully inform you who to be really wary of. I mean, I don't know. What do you think happened to Michael? Because how did this photo survive if the photographer also didn't die? Speaking of photos that are very strange, this photo is extremely chilling as it marks the last moment, and in fact the last of many moments of other victims of the killer Robert Ben Rhodes, truck stop killer. With up to 50 victims under his horrible, horrible hand, Robert had the tendency of taking photos of his victims before killing them, and regardless of their age, he was even convicted of killing a newlywed couple who was picked up in Seattle in November of 1989. In this photo, however, sadly was the picture of Regina Kay Walters, who was 14 years old at the day of her capture. She was picked up by Robert with her boyfriend, who Robert killed immediately. He held Regina captive for several hellish weeks, and in the other photos of Regina showed different hair lengths, indicating the time length he held her captive. Even with various bruisings visible on her body from the result of his imprisonment, and during her capture, Robert had the audacity to also call her father and tell him that he would cut his daughter's hair. Authorities found this photo of Regina under Robert's various collections of other photos moments before she had died. sky. In the final moments of 14-year-old Keith Sapsford leads a terrifying image of him plummeting from the skies on February 22nd, 1970. His harrowing final moments were captured by photographer John Gilpin, who happened to be casually snapping photos while waiting aboard his flight. The Australian teenager had just run away from boarding school and longed to see the world. After sneaking onto the tarmac of a Sydney International Airport, he hid inside a Tokyo-bound plane, but he fell to his death soon after takeoff. It took several few hours for the plane to depart with Sapsford waiting in the compartment. Ultimately, the aircraft did as planned and took off, but when the plane reopened its wheel compartment to retract its wheels, Keith Sapsford's fate was also sealed. He fell 200 feet to his death, hitting the ground below, and according to his father, he stated that all his son ever wanted to do was to travel the world. The teenager and his family had actually taken an overseas trip in order to quench that thirst, but after they returned home to Radswick, the sobering fact that their adventure was overly struckened with Sapsford. Simply put, he was restless as well in Australia. And speaking of unfortunate deaths, this photo of Omayra Sanchez is one for the books. On November 13, 1985, a volcanic eruption sent an enormous mudslide through the village of Omayra, Colombia, trapping 13-year-old Sanchez in the debris. She was immediately pinned down by the wreckage of her own house with only her head and arms above the floodwaters. Running at a speed of roughly 25 miles per hour, the mud flows reached Omayra and covered 85% of the city in heavy sludge. The city's roadways, houses, and bridges were also destroyed and engulfed by mud flows up to a mile wide. For almost 3 days, rescuers tried in vain to free her as she slowly succumbed to gangrene and hypothermia in the water. Finally, on November 16, she had passed away as helpless relief workers watched from a mere feet away. Just before she had died, photographer Frank Fournier captured this haunting image, as Fournier later recalled that he felt totally powerless in front of this little girl, who was facing death with courage and dignity. As many as 25,000 people died and only a fifth of Omayra's population survived. When it comes to natural disasters, this photo of Hilo Tsunami of 1946 is as intense as it was aggressive. On April 1st, 1946, a 0.6 magnitude earthquake off of the coast of Aleutian Islands in Alaska sent shockwaves throughout the Pacific. An ocean-wide tsunami quickly began to form, causing waves to reach as high as 13 stories. Soon, the tsunami hit Hilo, Hawaii, leaving more than 170 people dead in what remains in one of the worst disasters in Hawaiian history. The devastation of lives and property, which is equaling to $26 million in damages in 1946 dollars, on that day galvanized an effort to reach a tsunami warning system, which it did 2 years later, calling the Seismic Sea Wave Warning System. This chilling image captures the final moments of the unknown person at the bottom left was unfortunately caught in the tsunami wave. Another chilling photo is this message left by the lipstick killer William Herons. It says, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." On December 10, 1945, William Herons left this note scrawled in lipstick on the wall of Francis Brown's Chicago apartment. Just before writing this message, Herons brutally stabbed Browns to death and left a knife sticking out of her neck, naming him the suspected lipstick killer as the police searched Herons' room at the university, his parents' home, and a locker he kept at a local train station. In the locker, they found evidence of his lifetime hobby of thievery, and after taking his fingerprints, discovered that they were a 9-point match to those also found on another ransom note of another victim, a fact that would later be disputed. After they had arrested him and placed him through a tormenting interrogation, he began to confess after 4 days. Capturing him, however, also took 6 months, but eventually he did admit something that led to his confession, or what seemed to be a confession, of those crimes. And finally, this last haunting photo with a disturbing story is this. At first glance, yeah, you think, oh, this is just a regular yearbook type of photo of students posing, but when you notice the boys on the top left, they are seen pretending to shoot at the camera. Why? Because they were the ones solely responsible for the Columbine massacre. On April 20th, 1999, the Columbine High School shooting left all of America shocked, and teenagers Eric Harris and Dylan Klebitz massacred 12 of their classmates and one teacher before turning their weapons on themselves. In the aftermath, everyone attempted to make sense of how the shooting could have happened, on how two normal teens could have been capable of something like this. Parents, police, pundits, and survivors alike searched for clues and retroactive warnings in the pre-shooting behaviors of these boys. Survivors and police had found extreme confusion as to why the shooting had abruptly stopped during the onslaught, despite 50 students being still held hostage when the shooters decided to leave randomly. It was due to the fact that they were actually planning to end their own lives. The Columbine massacres was among the first of the national tragedies in the era of cell phones and the 24-hour news cycle, as reporters were at the school interviewing traumatized teenagers as the event had unfolded. Some students, unable to get through the overloaded emergency services, began calling news stations that broadcast their understandably unreliable eyewitness testimonies across the world. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment what photo creeped you out the most. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best.